Welcome, it's Jennifer, and today I get to play with holiday products. Yes, it's a little hot outside here, but I am very excited to be using some of the new holiday products from Hero Arts. This is one of the greatest releases they've ever had. I think it's fabulous. So I'm going to put several of the new products to use today and show you how to add some glitter effects to your heat embossing. And I'll show you some other fun tricks along the way. I have two cards, and we're going to first start with this one with the baby penguin. So I'm using the Hero Arts baby penguin set. This is such a cute set. I just love it. My daughter Lila already stole it, and it is a layering set, so you can build up a realistic looking image. So I wanted to stamp this first layer of the penguin, but in a super light gray. So what I'm going to do is ink it up with Hero Arts soft granite ink. I'm going to stamp it off first onto scrap paper. Then I'm going to stamp it onto my white cardstock. Now you'll barely see this since soft granite is a light ink to start with, so the second generation is going to be super light. So what I'm going to do is repeat that 2 more times. Now you could go with the first one time. You could skip the other 2, but I just found that it showed up a little bit better. So here is my third time. I first stamp it off onto scrap paper, and then I stamp it again onto my project. Since I'm using the Misty, I stamp perfectly every time, and check out that light little ghost-like image that you get. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom half of that same piece of white cardstock so that I can actually make 2 little penguins at once. I almost always stamp more than I need so that I have spares for extra cards, or if I mess one up, I have a backup plan. So now I have the bottom layer done in super light gray. So I'm moving on to the second layer, and I'm going to stamp this with that same soft granite ink, but I'm just going to stamp it direct this time. So there you can see what it looks like when it's just stamped first generation, and that will soften a bit as it dries. I often like to heat set between my layers of color stamping. If I'm stamping several layers of dye ink on top of each other, I like to heat set in between layers just so they don't kind of blend into each other too much and it stays nice and crisp. Now for the final layer, I'm using Hero Arts black dye ink. Now you could use any type of ink for this technique. I do think that second generation or stamping does work better with dye inks though. So there we have our cute little penguins. Now at this point, I decided I wanted to add some sparkle to him, just to the areas where we stamped black. So I cleaned off my stamp, inked it up with versamark ink, and I'm stamping that versamark clear ink onto both of these penguins. Use my anti-static powder tool first. And now I'm going to add on a sparkle clear embossing powder. This looked super cute in real life, but I ended up deciding not to use the sparkly penguins for my card because I had so much other sparkle going on, but I wanted to show you because I thought it was such a cute touch, and we'll save this for a different card that I'll do in the future. Okay, so now here are the 2. This one right here has the sparkle on the penguin. It's hard to see in the video. Just a little bit of sparkle wherever there's black, and then here's the one without the sparkle. So I'm going to go with the plain one. Okay, now we get to create our background. Now for this, I decided to use Distress Oxide inks. The reason I chose that ink is because I'm in love with it. The other reason is because it blends great. And another reason is because I'm going to splatter some sparkle on this. And when the oxide inks come in contact with water, it gives like a oxide look where it looks almost white. And these are really creamy. However, you could use traditional distress inks for this technique and get a very similar look, or you could use any other dye ink that kind of activates with water when you splatter it. But I definitely recommend either the distress ink or the distress oxide inks, which I'm using here. The oxide inks just have a little bit of a pigment property to them that allows them to blend better, gives a creamy look, and it also reacts to give that oxide look when it comes in contact with water. Instead of water, I'm going to use shimmer spritz. And when I spritz this, I'm actually pressing the button down only halfway to get like droplets. And then I'm misting it full to get like a mist to it. I wanted droplets to kind of look like a night sky. As I heat set this, I'll have some sparkle because of the shimmer in that mist. And then also kind of a white look to it because of the oxide inks underneath. This is so beautiful in real life. Camera doesn't pick up the sparkle, but it is the most beautiful night sky and it didn't take long. Next, I'm using the Hero Arts Oval Infinity dies to cut out a large oval. I'm going to cover up that purple on the bottom. Now I have some white cardstock and I'm cutting 2 waves from my white cardstock. These are going to be kind of like snowbanks. You could use like a snowbank or a hill border die for this, but I was lazy, so I just cut it myself. It worked out just fine. But I am going to take those and have to die cut them to get that oval look on the bottom. I could glue them on but trim them, but I was afraid it wouldn't look very good. So what I'm doing is positioning my banks over the background, kind of figuring out where I want it to cut. Then I'm going to hold that same oval die over those 2 snowbanks and run it through my die cut machine. Then the bottom will have the same curve as our background oval. This die set from Hero Arts is great because there are so many dies in it and the price point is excellent. So now I have 2 little snowbanks. I could leave these plain white cardstock, but I wanted them to kind of shine and look glossy like snow, and I want them to glisten. So to do this, I covered them with Versamark ink, and I'm adding a layer of white embossing powder. When I heat set this, it will have a nice shine or glossy finish. Now I could leave it at 1 layer, but I decided to do a second layer right on top. The reason I'm doing that is it becomes more smooth that way, since this powder has to cover such a large surface. So once the first layer was cool, I put another layer of the Versamark ink and another layer of the embossing powder, and I'll heat set those. So then I have a really smooth, shiny snow look. Now I wanted to add sparkle kind of the top of the banks. So I have some glitter ready here, and I've got it open and ready to go. I'm going to reheat up the embossing powder towards the top edge where the wave is. Once it's good and hot, that means it's kind of liquidy again, I'm going to quickly grab a pinch of glitter and kind of sprinkle it around the top edge. So that hot embossing powder will actually allow that glitter to kind of fall into it and stay there. So I'm going to let that one cool. I'm going to do the other one here. I'm going to heat it up so I get it nice and hot. You'll kind of see it move a little bit, or it looks like you're kind of reactivating the embossing powder. Then I can add another little pinch of glitter to this. This is a super fine glitter, and I'm not using much. I only wanted a little bit of glistening on the top of the bank. Now once these are cool, you can knock off the excess, and you can leave it like this and have this pretty little glittery shine kind of on the surface of the embossing powder. Or you can reheat set it again, and the glitter kind of sinks into it and gets this really cool textury look that I thought was great for snow. So you can kind of see it there. You get a little texture towards the top with some sparkle in it, but in real life, it is dynamite. Now, I could have used a sparkle embossing powder here, but I find that using a fine glitter gives such a better look, and you can kind of control where the shine is. So this is very subtle and just towards the top of the banks. And as always, I use a Swiffer dusting cloth to clean up my work surface, a great way to kind of control the glitter mess. So I've put some double-sided adhesive on the bottom of, or on the back of the snowbanks, and I put the first one down onto the oval background, and the second one I'm putting on with some foam tape, so I have a little dimension to it, and there we have our background. You can kind of see that texture and glitter there on the snowbanks. Next, I need to get that note card ready. And if you look closely, there is an embossed oval frame around our centerpiece. To do this, I'm using that same oval die set from Hero Arts. I'm getting my Big Shot machine ready to do an impression or embossing. To do this, I set up my Big Shot as I would if I were using an embossing folder. So you can do that with any machine you have. You also need that embossing pad, that brown kind of foam piece that you see there. That allows me to make an impression into my cardstock instead of cutting it. So that oval die that you see there is one size larger than the one that I used to cut my inked background. So it'll give a nice frame look. Now that die just pressed into that paper because we use that embossing pad, and we get a nice looking frame for our centerpiece. And finally, we have our sentiment to add. So I did some embossing on the snowbanks actually. So you can emboss on top of embossing. To do this, I'm rubbing it with my anti-static powder tool. Then I have some little sentiment words from a Hero Arts wonderful stamp set, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I'm going to stamp with some VersaFine black pigment ink, and I'm going to use some black embossing powder on top. I'm not a big fan of black embossing powder because it seems to go everywhere, but in this case, I found it gave the best results. So I'm going to stamp the rest of the sentiment underneath it. And yes, I am stamping onto a slick heat embossed surface, so I got to be careful not to move when I stamp. But the nice thing is I can wipe that ink off if I do mess up. Then I go ahead and add the embossing powder and heat set it. Just be careful not to overheat set it or it will bleed into the white. Now here I have a wonderful word die cut. This is from a Hero Arts die. I'm going to show you that in a moment. I stacked a couple of black wonderful word die cuts together and covered them with a layer of clear heat embossing so it shines. Then I just added it onto the card, and I used a piece of foam to add our little penguin right into the center. And then final touches, I'm using some strong liquid adhesive to add some wonderful gems from Lucy's cards. These are iridescent and they work so well on this background. They're clear and sparkly, so they pick up whatever color's behind it, and it looks great on that night sky. I also added a little wink of Stella to our little penguin so that he could sparkle too, and look at all the glistening on this. We have the shimmer on the background, the gems on the background, the glitter on the snowbank, and the wink of Stella on our penguin. Now before we move on to the next card, I did want to show you what I used for the sentiment on this card, since I didn't show you earlier when I was creating it. This is the Hero Arts wonderful stamp and die set. They are sold together, and in it are sentiments for holidays or non-holidays. So there is Thanksgiving, birthday, all different kinds of messages that you can create from this set. It's a great one. Okay, our second card has a lot of the same techniques, just another example. I'll show you some of the highlights here. I'm using this new Hero Arts Holly stamp layering set that is just fabulous. This is my favorite from the release. So I'm starting with the bottom layer of the leaves and stamping it with my lightest green, which is the Hero Arts Fresh Lawn Green. When this dries, it is the most beautiful Kelly Christmas green. I just love it. So I stamp that first, and I'm heat setting it before I go to the next color. Then I'm actually going to skip to the third layer. This is the layer that stamps kind of the veins or the stem of the leaves. So I'm stamping this with my darkest ink, the Bold Pine ink. This is a hybrid ink, but it works great for stamp layering too. And heat setting that. Now I'm going back to the second layer where I'm using a medium shade of green. The reason I'm doing this last is I kind of needed to see where that third layer was going to end up to kind of follow a pattern. It's okay to do the layering out of order. You can start with the last layer first or the first layer last, whatever you want. Whatever works best for you to put them images together. This one is super easy to layer. And the medium color that I used was Field Greens. And check out that beautiful holly that you get in the end. I love the kind of contemporary look it has. So now I'm actually going to go back to that first solid layer. And I'm putting it right back on top of where I stamped it before, using my anti-static powder tool. And then I'm stamping right back on top of the first ones with Versamark ink. This allows it to be sticky so I can add some clear embossing powder to it. I'm going to do the same thing on the other two leaves there. Once that's cool, I'm going to repeat that. I'm actually stamping Versamark ink on top of that first layer of clear embossing powder to make it sticky again so I could put a second layer of clear embossing powder. This gives me more dimension, more shine, and more smoothness. Okay, now once that was cool, I cut them up, and now I'm reheating it. I'm reheating one of the hollies and putting a pinch of glitter towards the tip of the holly. Then I can knock off the excess. It's always better to start with less glitter because you can always add more. Here I put a little bit too much, so on the others I'm going to do less. Once I put the glitter on it, I heat set it again so that the glitter becomes trapped in the embossing powder and it gives really cool texture. This time I'm putting less glitter on and kind of sprinkling it from higher up and get a little bit of glitter on the tip of the holly, and it's so beautiful. So you have this smooth, dimensional, glossy finish to the holly because we did 2 layers of clear, and then this fine little glistening thanks to that glitter that we put on the tip. And here you can kind of see how beautiful those leaves turn out. Okay, so now I want to do that background. You see that impressed star in the background? For that, I used the new Hero Arts 12-point star infinity die set. This is the coolest die set. Now, there are a bunch of different sizes of stars here, and what I'm going to do is tape most of them. I left the smallest one out. Tape most of them together by putting tape on the back of the dies. This way they will all kind of fit into each other, and I can use them as one large die instead to create the background impression. I love that you can use these to make dimensional stars, ornaments, whatever you want. So again, I'm using my embossing pad with my Big Shot to set up my Big Shot as I would an embossing folder. And this time I'm laying this down onto the front of a note card. And if you look closely, I'm going to pause it right here. There's the score line where the front of my note card folds. And I've lined the score line up with the edge of my embossing pad. And I'm going to allow that die to kind of hang off the embossing pad, hang over the score line. So what happens is when I put my cutting plate on top and run this through, it only makes an impression below the scoring line because the embossing pad is only below the score line. And there we have that great impression on the front of our card. The main part of the sentiment on this card is a blessings die cut that I covered with some gold glitter embossing powder. And I'll show you this die and stamp set in a moment. Now I went ahead and assembled my card and I glued everything onto a card. Turns out I didn't like having just a white background, so I went ahead and trimmed my white background down and glued it onto a red note card. So even though I took the time to emboss just the front of a white note card, I did trim it down. I just felt it looked better. I also stamped "On Your Birthday" underneath the gold blessing sentiment. I did put a coat of clear red Nuvo jewel drops onto my little berries that I stamped using the Hero Arts Holly stamp set. And this gives it nice round shine. And then I sprinkled on just a little of that super fine glitter onto the berries. And this really makes a big difference to use that fine glitter and only a little bit because it catches the light so nicely. And you still have a smooth look to your card. So here is the finished card with everything dried. You can see the texture in the background, the shine on our leaves, the touch of glitter here and there. It's really a great way to add more to your heat embossing. Any kind of super fine clear glitter would be great for this. I really liked making this card and hope to make several of them for Christmas tags. So here is the Hero Arts Blessing die and stamp set. They come together. There are many different blessing greetings on here. I did a birthday holiday blessing one because my mom's birthday is Christmas Eve, and so is my mother-in-law's. So now I've got that ready to go. So there you have a fun way to add a little bit of glittery touch to your heat embossing, and also layer up those heat embossing layers. It can add a lot to a card. Thanks for watching. Supplies are linked below in the YouTube description, but go to my blog for much more information. I'll be back soon with more videos using the new Hero Arts. In the meantime, there are a couple other videos there in the middle that you can check out. I appreciate you stopping by and have a fabulous week.